So I'm back with the continuation of Pia Orphan Chapter 22. Mrs. Hudson said, will you please get a snack for the girls too? Maybe some fruit muffins or dried fruit. Of course, Pia said and turned to leave. Pia, Mrs. Hudson said, yes, ma'am. I don't know what we would have done without you here. Thank you. He crawled up Pia's cheeks. I'm glad I was able to help. Just then the doorbell rang downstairs and Mrs. Hudson sat up with a start, her eyes wide. Who in heaven's name could that be? She said, did someone take down the no visitor sign? No, ma'am, Peter said. It's still there as far as I know, unless it fell off. I'll see who it is and send them away. Please do, Mrs. Hudson said. I don't want anyone coming into this house. Pierre hurried out of the playroom, along the hall, and down the stairs, her irritation growing. What kind of person would ignore the sign on the front door, not to mention a white crappie? Whoever it was, they had to be rude or dimwit, or both. The doorbell chimed several more times, a little longer with each ring, until the bell sounded like it was shattered. When she reached the foyer, Pia drew back the sidelight window curtain to peer out, ready to give the doorbell ring a piece of her mind, but then she saw who it was, and she gasped and stepped back. Nurse Wallace stood on the porch with what looked like a medical bag in one hand. What was she doing here? Had she come to take her to the asylum or send her away on a train? No, that didn't make sense. Mrs. Hudson wouldn't get rid of her. She had just thanked her for taking care of the girls and helping out. Then she remembered what Mrs. Hudson said about not knowing anything was wrong with Leo, even though she was his mother. Maybe Pia's presence made her feel guilty. Maybe she couldn't stand to look at her one more day. I know someone's in there, Nurse Wallace said from the other side of the door. I saw you peeping out the window. She pressed the doorbell again, this time leaving her finger on the buzzer. Can't you read the sign? Pia said. It says no visitors. Then she had another thought, and her heart leaped in her chest. Maybe Nurse Wallace had found Ollie and Max. Maybe Mother Joe had sent her here to tell her the news. She fumbled with the lock and yanked the door open. When Nurse Wallace saw who would answer, her brows shut up in surprise. Oh, she said. She started to say something else, but paused, as if rethinking her words, then raised her chin. I wonder what happened to you. Pia's shoulders dropped. Nurse Wallace wasn't there about the twins. She had no idea Pia even worked there. Mother Joe sent me here to help with the children, she said. I can see that. Lucky you. I was hoping you were here because you had bad news about my brothers. Nurse Wallace glanced behind Pia, trying to see into the house. No, I haven't heard or seen a thing about them. Did you talk to anyone? Did you ask about them at other orphanages? What about the hospital? I already told you I didn't find anything, and I'm not here to see you anyway. I come to check on Mrs. Hudson. Her husband sent for me. Pia clenched her jaws. Why was she being so heartless? Either she didn't care about the twins or she hadn't looked for them. Even if she was still upset about Pia yelling at her the first time they met. Her indifference seemed strange for someone who claimed to love helping children. But regardless of the reason behind her behavior, Pia needed to decide whether or not to allow her inside. Mrs. Hudson would be upset if she did, and if Dr. Hudson sent for her, he might be upset if she refused. Well, are you going to let me in or just standing looking confused? Nurse Wallace said. Pia wasn't sure what to do. Dr. Hudson had sent for help with the children without his wife knowing, so maybe he sent for Nurse Wallace too. She should run into the office and check. She stepped back and opened the door all the way. You'll have to wait in the foyer while I let Dr. Hudson know you're here. There's no need for that, Nurse Wallace said. She entered, sat down her bed, and proceeded to take off her coat. His instructions were very clear. I'm to meet with Miss Hudson while the nanny that will be you occupied the children. But is she still in bed? No, she was getting ready to come down for tea when you rang. Nurse Wallace smoothed the front of her uniform and picked up her bag again. Very well, then. Where is she taking it? It's in the kitchen, I think, but she doesn't want anyone in the house. I'll get Dr. Hudson. I'm sure he'll want to speak to her first to tell her what's going on. That won't be necessary, Nurse Wallace said. I can deal with Mrs. Hudson. Trust me when I say she doesn't know what's best for her right now. Dr. Hudson, on the other hand, does. He told me about their son and what a hard time his wife has been having since he passed. She needs someone to talk to, someone who understands. Now show me to the kitchen, and then you can fetch Mrs. Hudson. I don't think that's a good idea, Pia said. I don't want to go against her wishes. Nurse Wallace squalled. Why don't you let me do my job and I'll make sure you can keep doing yours? Otherwise, I'll tell Dr. Hudson how uncooperated and troublesome you were at St. Vincent's and recommend you be sent away. Pia Blanche, why was she being hostile? Surely the husband wouldn't appreciate her acting that way. She took a deep breath and gathered a small measure of courage. He won't believe you, she said. Are you sure, Nurse Wallace said? I heard you tried to escape St. Vincent several times, and Sister Ernestine didn't have one good thing to say about you. Have you even told Mrs. Hudson about your missing brothers? A hot flush of fear and frustration crawled up her neck. She couldn't risk the nurse talking to Mrs. Hudson about Arlie and Max. Mrs. Hudson might wonder what else she was hiding, especially after the incident with Leo. Dr. Hudson and his wife were some of the nicest people she ever met, but they'd never understand what she'd done to her brothers, especially as soon after losing their baby boy. Maybe she would tell them someday, but not now. With the heavy weight of resentment like a boulder on her shoulders, her chest, she reluctantly showed Nurse Waters the way to the kitchen, then went up to the playroom to get Mrs. Hudson. After explaining the situation and apologizing numerous times, she was relieved to hear Mrs. Hudson say it wasn't her fault, that she was upset with her husband for sending for the nurse, not with her. After Mrs. Hudson told the other older girl to stay in the playroom, then put Elizabeth, who had fallen asleep in her arms, in the nursery, she and Pia went back downstairs. When they entered the kitchen, Nurse Waters was at the table pouring hot water into 2 teacups. She set the tea kettle down on a hot mat and smiled at Mrs. Hudson. Her hands clasped at her waist. "May I help you?" Mrs. Hudson said, her voice curt. "I hope you don't mind," Nurse Waters said, "but your daughter said you were getting ready to have tea, and I thought I'd help out. May I join you?" Pia frowned. Why was Nurse Waters acting like she didn't know who she was? Maybe she was the one who needed a mental evaluation. "My daughter," Mrs. Hudson said. Then she realized who the nurse meant, and she ran her hand along the back of Pia's arms, surprising her and making her stiffen at the same time. "Oh, this isn't my daughter. She's..." Mrs. Hudson hesitated and regarded the nurse with worried eyes. "I'm sorry, who are you again?" Pia said, "My husband sent for you, but he didn't tell me you were coming. I'm sure he would have told me something that important." Nurse Waters gave her a smile that was kind and condescending. "Forgive me, Mrs. Hudson, but that was a little white lie. I knew Pia wouldn't let me see you otherwise." Pia gasped at the nurse, anger flushing her cheeks. Mrs. Hudson's face went dark. "What's this all about, Dan?" she said. "What are you doing in my house?" "First, let me tell you how sorry I am about your son, Leonard," Nurse Wallace said. "One of my nurse friends read about his passing in the newspaper and told me about it. Such a tragedy. She says your husband is a wonderful doctor and she thought I should stop by because You work at the hospital?" Mrs. Hudson said. Fear edged her voice. Nurse Wallace shook her head. "No, I'm visiting a nurse. I'm a visiting nurse. I visit people in their homes when they're sick." Mrs. Hudson gasped and took a step back. "Oh, no. Stop!" "Oh no," Nurse Wallace said. "There's no need to worry. I promise I haven't been around a new flu case in weeks, and I never take the chance of bringing sickness into your home when you're already lost so much. I was only hoping I'd be able to talk to you, to offer my sincerest condolences about your boy and to help you get through this difficult time." "No one can help me," Mrs. Hudson said, "especially someone I don't know. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like you to leave." Nurse Wallace came around the table, a sympathetic look on her face. "You're right, you don't know me, but I helped many women get through the death of a child, and I know what you're feeling. I know you're suffering a tremendous loss and have a hard time thinking clearly right now. I know you're in the deepest, darkest pit of despair you ever imagined, and I know your heart is shattered, but most of all, I know you're not sure you can keep living with such unspeakable pain." Tears flooded Mrs. Hudson's eyes and her face twisted in anger. "How could you possibly know what I'm feeling?" she said. "You don't know anything about me, and you certainly don't know anything about my son." "I know because I've been where you are," Nurse Waters said. "I lost my baby boy, too, when he was only 4 months old." Pia drew in a sharp breath. She had no idea. "I know what it's like to feel so heartbroken and alone you think you'll go mad," Nurse Waters continued. "Like no one else will ever understand the devastation you feel. I know what it's like to want to die, and if you go on living to wonder how you'll ever eat or laugh or smile again. But I also know you have other children to live for, which is something I didn't have. You owe it to them to get through this." Mrs. Hudson, "just think about what will happen to them if they lost you too. How awful it would be for them to have that much strategy in their lives. They need you to stay strong. And I'll be back. The continuation of Orphans Pia.